Well, you may not have it on your calendar, but a lot of people here in Washington do. The Supreme Court scheduled to wrap up its current term this week, and several key decisions have yet to be released. For more insight on what's at stake, let's bring in our panel here. Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino, and President of the Constitutional Accountability Center, Elizabeth Wydra. Thanks for being here, ladies. A lot to get to as
Absolutely.
we watch. The flurry of activity that happens now. There are a couple big cases I want to get your take on. Gerrymandering and, of course, what's happening with the census question at hand. President Trump wants to put a question on the census about citizenship. So, Carrie, I want to start with you. How do you think adding this question could change the political landscape? I mean, this is a big one.
Well, this is really going back to a question that has been asked for most of our nation's history broadly on the census. In recent years, it's only been asked of subsets of people, and he's just going back to the practice of asking it of the entire country. It's an important thing for the nation to know how many citizens it has and to have that information when it comes to assigning voting districts, which we're going to talk about later, right, and other services. So I think this should not be a controversial thing at all. However, I do predict that it's going to turn out that way. I just think it's worrisome because we're seeing a lot of attacks on the very notion of citizenship. Some people saying it shouldn't even be a prerequisite for voting. I think this is part of a worrying trend.
And they say that timing is everything, of course, and because the Census Bureau has to print the question out, they say by the end of the month. This has to all be done by July 1st, essentially. So what do you think, Elizabeth, are the implications for the 2020 election? And I was reading that if it is put on, we could be looking at 6,000 to 7,000 people not taking part in the census because it could be on this questionnaire.
Oh, I think the numbers are much more than that, and that's
right,
based on the Census Bureau's own figures, actually. So we're not just talking about the 2020 election, we're talking about a whole decade of impact from this. And, yes, the deadline is coming up, but we need to make sure this is right, because the census is in the Constitution. It requires a count of all people. When you're drawing political districts, the Constitution is clear, and the Supreme Court has recently held that everyone, citizens and non-citizens, must be counted. So it doesn't matter whether you're a citizen for drawing the political lines. And we're talking about $800 billion of crucial funding. Again, that doesn't matter about citizenship. It comes to communities, healthcare, schools, roads, important federal funding that could be denied, particularly communities of color. And we've seen that this new evidence coming up about the potential motivation for this question being to make the electorate more white and more Republican, and that's concerning. So the court has to make sure that it makes the right decision, and the law requires that the citizenship question be there for the right reasons. And we've seen the lower courts say that the Trump administration acted in bad faith when it put that question on there.
All right, Carrie, let's talk about the gerrymandering issue at hand. There are two specific cases that we've been watching. The appeal to challenge North Carolina's statewide congressional map, which was crafted by a GOP-led legislature, and the Maryland case, which centers on the configuration of the 6th congressional district. Taking a look at these maps now on your screen. The stakes are high in both cases, in all cases, right?
Oh, right. And you see typically in both of them, one party drew the maps and the other party challenges it. It happens every time. And what we have is a situation where the Constitution gives broad power to states to draw these districts. Obviously, they have to stay within limits. We have a lot of challenges about racial divides in these things, and the court steps in there. Now they're asking something very new, which is, let's have the court say, is this too political or not? The problem is there is no constitutional or legal standard to go to there. It just is I don't know. They've been looking for years trying to find one. The court has never found a standard to apply. That risks making the court itself a very political force. If they're just going in and second guessing, it's too easy to make the courts into the politicians themselves. This is a political process. It needs to stay in the hands of the politicians. It's going to bring the court down to that political level to have them try to invent standards on a case-by-case basis. And I think, the long history is that they've said there is no standard. I think that's the direction they'll go.
Elizabeth, I want to give you a chance to weigh in there.
I respectfully disagree. I think that this isn't second guessing. It's simply enforcing the Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause, the First Amendment requirement that you aren't discriminated against based on your political views. And that's really what's being argued here from both parties. It's a cross-partisan argument that drawing these districts to disadvantage one political party over another when they're in the extreme violates the Constitution, and the court's job is to step in and enforce the Constitution. So we have a system under the Constitution where the voters choose their elected leaders, not the other other way around, and that's what the court is being asked to enforce here.
Is there anything else that you're keeping an eye on? Real quick, last word.
I think there's a really important case with the separation of powers, Kaiser versus Wilkie, that has to do with whether bureaucratic agencies can both write their own regulations and then interpret them, and the courts would not be able to have as much of a say in saying what the law is. And I think that'll be really important to see if the courts let these agencies take over and become judge and jury effectively.
All right. Well, we'll be pulling you guys back for your expertise as we move through these next few weeks and take a look back at how everything ends. Thank you both so much for being here, Carrie and Elizabeth. We appreciate it.
Great to be here.
All right. Thank you.